Will you bury me?
They still talk about Thomas Hart down in Red Rock, Arizona territory. And if you ever stop at the old trading post for water, someone will point you up the wash toward the cottonwoods and tell you the same thing. He rejected every woman alive, not in a cruel way, not in a loud way, just in a quiet, final way that left no room for argument. The dressmaker's daughter from town once rode out with a fresh apple pie. He thanked her, took the pie, and walked her back to her wagon. The schoolteacher wrote him a kind letter after his wife passed. He wrote back 3 lines and left it at that. The widow Miller, good woman with 3 grown sons, offered to keep his house in order. He paid her for 1 day's mending and said no more. After a few years, people stopped asking. You would have thought he was hard-hearted, but he wasn't. You would have seen it if you had watched him at dawn. He talked to his mare while he brushed her. He saved a broken-legged calf that spring and fed it by hand until it could stand. He left cracked corn out for the quail in winter. He kept his land clean and his fences straight. He just kept his door closed to the one thing everyone thought would fix him. His wife was named Sarah. She died of a fever the second winter they were on the homestead. He buried her himself under the 2 big cottonwoods by the creek, because she loved the sound they made when the wind moved through them. He set a plain river stone at her head, and he made a promise right there, not out of anger, just out of love, that he would not bring another woman into the house they had planned together. He thought keeping that promise was the same as keeping her memory safe. So for near 15 years he said no, and he meant it, and Red Rock learned to leave him be. That is why what happened that late August evening was talked about for so long. The sun was low, and the air was gold and full of dust. Thomas was mending harness on his porch when he saw a figure coming slow up the wagon track. It was an older woman, Apache, walking with a cottonwood limb for a staff. She wore a faded blue skirt and a shawl that had been mended many times. Her hair was silver and braided back. She carried a small cloth bundle tied with twine. She did not hurry. She did not look around like she was lost. She looked like she knew exactly where she was going. He stood out of habit. In Red Rock you stand when an elder comes to your gate. She stopped at the bottom step, caught her breath, and looked up at him with eyes that were tired but very clear. She did not ask for water. She did not ask for food. She did not ask for work. She asked, "Will you bury me?" You could have heard the creak over the rocks in the quiet after that. Thomas had been asked for a lot of things in his life. For help pulling a wagon out of mud. For a loan of a hammer. For a spare blanket in a cold snap. He had never been asked for that. He found his manners. "Ma'am," he said, "come sit. You're winded." She lowered herself onto the bottom step like she was grateful for the wood under her. He brought her a dipper of water from the bucket. She drank slow. He waited. "My name is Tahali," she said. "I am not from the band that camps north now. My family is gone from here. My husband is gone many years from a winter sickness. My daughter married far toward the mountains. I walked here because I heard you still live here." Thomas nodded. He did not know what to say to the question she had asked, so he said nothing. "You do not know me," Tali said, "but your Sarah knew me. One summer, the dry year, I came to the creek with my little girl. We had no food that day. Your wife was washing clothes. She did not ask us questions. She gave us bread still warm and a pan of beans. She filled our water gourd. She told my girl the cottonwoods sang when they were happy. My girl laughed. We lived because of that day. Thomas felt his throat get tight. He remembered that dry year. He remembered Sarah coming in at noon, saying she had met a mother and child at the creek. "I have this sickness in my chest," Tolly said, touching just below her collarbone. "It comes and goes. The doctor in town says it will not get better. I do not want to be a trouble to anyone. I do not want to lie down on the trail and be left for the buzzards. I want to be put in the ground near where kindness once lived." I remembered the 2 trees. I remembered your wife. So I walked here to ask you, will you bury me beside her when the time comes? I am not asking for your house. I am not asking for your table every day. I am asking for a place. Thomas had spent 15 years practicing the word no. It was ready on his tongue. It was clean and polite, and it kept his promise safe. He looked at this woman with the mended shawl and the cottonwood staff, and he could not make the word come out. "I can't answer that on a step," he said finally. "You'll stay the night in the barn loft. It's clean. There's a cot. In the morning we'll talk more." She did not argue. She thanked him. He carried her bundle. He showed her where the ladder was and where the water barrel was. He left her a lantern turned low. He did not sleep much that night. He sat on his porch and listened to the cottonwoods. He thought about Sarah and the promise he had made. He thought about all the women he had turned away and how he had told himself it was faithfulness. He wondered if faithfulness could also look like a closed door. In the morning, he found Tolly already up. She had swept the barn floor. She had set yesterday's beans to soak. She had not touched anything in his house. She was sitting on an upturned bucket in the sun, breathing slow. "You don't have to work for a maybe," he said. "I have to work for my hands," she said. "If my hands stop, my heart gets lonely." He made coffee. They drank it on the porch. He told her about the stone under the trees. She told him about her daughter in the mountains and how she had not wanted to travel that far in her condition and be a weight. She told him she could cook and mend, and she knew how to plant corn in a hollow so the wind would not take the soil. She did not bargain. She just told the truth. Thomas said, "If you are asking for a place in the ground, I can give you that promise right now. I will. But if you are asking for a place to live until then, you should know this. House has been quiet a long time." "I like quiet," Tolly said. "Quiet lets you hear the trees." So she stayed. Not in his house at first. In the little side room off the kitchen, where Sarah had kept her seeds and her yarn. Thomas cleaned it out. He moved the cot in. He told himself it was temporary. Temporary turned into a week. A week turned into the first frost. Red Rock noticed, of course. People notice everything when there is little else to do. Some folks nodded and said it was a Christian thing to do. Some folks whispered because she was Apache, and he was white, and his wife was buried on his land. A few women who had once brought pies felt a sting and said he had rejected them for someone else. Thomas heard it all and said almost nothing. Tolly heard it too and kept sweeping and mending and planting. What changed first was not big. It was small things. He started setting 2 cups out for coffee without thinking. He started leaving the lantern lit a little longer because she liked to shell beans in the evening. She started humming while she worked. Low songs without words that made the kitchen feel less empty. She taught him to plant his beans in 3s, not rows, so they held each other up. She showed him how to weave a stronger corn husk mat for his knees when he weeded. She never touched Sarah's things without asking. She asked about the stone under the cottonwoods, and he found he could talk about Sarah without the usual ache closing his throat. One evening in November, he told Tali the whole story of the fever winter, something he had never told the preacher or his neighbor. She listened. She did not try to fix it. When he was done, she said, "Your promise was a good promise for a young grief. Maybe promises can grow up too." He thought about that for a long time. Winter was hard on her chest. The cold made her cough. Thomas moved her cot closer to the kitchen stove. He rode to town and bought white muslin for new curtains, because the old ones let the draft in. The dressmaker's daughter sold it to him and did not bring a pie. She just said, "That's a good weight for winter." And he said, "Thank you." When the snow melted, Tali was thinner, but she was still here. She walked to the cottonwoods on the first warm day, slow, with her staff. Thomas walked beside her. She stood between the two trees and listened. "They do sing," she said. "On windy days," he said. She touched the river stone at Sarah's head. "Thank you," she said, and he knew she was not talking to him. Spring brought work. They planted together. The neighbors' children started stopping by because Tali would tell them stories while she snapped beans. Stories about Coyote and Rabbit, and the time the river changed its mind. She never told stories that made anyone a villain. She told stories that made people think. The children liked her because she listened, like what they said mattered. The school teacher came out one afternoon in May with a book of medicinal plants. She sat at the table with Tali, and they compared names for things. Yarrow, mint, willow bark. They wrote them down in 2 languages. Thomas made coffee and stayed out of the way and felt something loosen in his chest he had not known was tight. That summer, the women in town stopped trying to marry him off. It wasn't because of Tali. It was because they saw he was not lonely in the way they had thought. He was not looking for a wife. He was learning how to be a neighbor again. Years passed like that. Not fast, not slow. The way good years do when you are not counting them. Tali's cough never left, but it did not take her either. She lived 5 more summers under his roof. 5 birthdays where Thomas baked a pan of cornbread, and she laughed at his heavy hand with the salt. 5 winters where they played checkers by the stove, and she beat him more often than not. If you had asked Thomas in those years if he had broken his promise to Sarah, he would have told you no. He had kept the heart of it. He had kept her memory honored. He had just made room beside it for another kind of love, the kind that is not about marrying, but about not letting a person die alone on a road. On a morning in late September, the air crisp as a clean sheet, Tali did not come out for coffee. Thomas found her in her lit, hands folded, face calm, the way people look when they have gone to sleep and decided not to come back. There was no struggle in the room. The quilt was straight. The window was open, a crack so she could hear the trees. He sat with her a long time. Then he did what he said he would do. He did not send to town for a man with a wagon. He washed his face, put on his clean shirt, and took his shovel to the cottonwoods. The ground was soft from the creek. He dug a place to the left of Sarah's stone, careful and square, the way his father had taught him. The preacher came out when he heard, and the school teacher, and the dressmaker's daughter, who was now the dressmaker herself, and 2 of the neighbor boys who were men now. They stood in a loose circle. No one made a speech about differences. The preacher read a short psalm about lying down in green pastures. The schoolteacher read the plant names. Tali had taught her in both languages. Thomas said, "She asked me for a place. This is a good place." They lowered her down, wrapped in her mended shawl, and the new quilt Thomas had bought the winter before. He filled the earth himself. He set a river stone at her head, a little smaller than Sarah's, and he smoothed the dirt with his hands. Afterward, people stayed for coffee. They sat on the porch and on stumps, and they talked about the bean planting, and the dry year, and the way the cottonwood sounded when the wind was right. No one tried to matchmake Thomas that day. No one needed to. He lived another long while after that. He never married again. That part of the story people get wrong. They think the widow changed his mind about women. She didn't. She changed his mind about doors. He started leaving his gate unlatched. He started keeping an extra plate on the shelf. Travelers knew they could water at his creek. A young couple starting out homesteaded the quarter to the south, and he helped them raise their first barn. When folks now tell the story in Red Rock, they always start it the same way. He rejected every woman alive, and they always end it the same way. Until an Apache widow asked, "Will you bury me?" It sounds like a story about death, but if you listen, you'll hear it's not. It's a story about a question that was big enough to open a closed life. It's about a promise that grew up. It's about two cottonwoods that learned a new song when the wind moved through 3 stones instead of 1. And if you ever find yourself up that wash, go quiet when you get to the trees. You can still hear it.